Welcome to Kellogg's Global Politics. I'm Anita, and I'm here with my co-host Ryan.
Thanks, and glad to be here.
With the August 1st deadline looming, we look at the current state of U.S. trade deals. Who has a deal? How many will get signed by August 1st? Will there be another extension? And what is their economic impact on the U.S.? We then discuss the border conflict between Thailand and Cambodia, which has recently turned deadly for the first time since 2011. What are they fighting about? And what are the political consequences for both countries? Finally, we provide an update on the Russia-Ukraine war. We discuss the pressing questions as to which side seems to be making progress, how is U.S. policy evolving under Trump, and what does this foretell for the future of the conflict? So we've been spending a little time enjoying summer.
Yeah, so we just got back from North Carolina, so visited family there. But before that, we went to Busch Gardens and to the Outer Banks.
Yeah, it was blisteringly hot.
Yeah, no brutal heat, but no, I think our daughter enjoyed it, especially the Busch Gardens. She's really gotten into roller coasters quite a bit, I'd say, over the last year or two. So we had to work our way up on the roller coasters compared to the first visit where I was able to chicken out when she was like 8 or 9 years old. Basically, the ones that were built in the last 10 years, which looked terrifying, definitely looked terrifying from the ground. I was like, let's skip these. But there's no way around it this time. I had to bite the bullet and ride the big boy rides.
It was fun.
It was fun. I think these roller coasters are so well engineered that it's not that bad. It looks terrifying when you're at the ground and you're looking at like the angles that these things are going at now. But when you're on it, it's actually pretty comfortable. It wasn't that bad. Yeah. Even going backwards, which like 10 years ago, I would get sick going backwards. But this one didn't affect me so bad.
Yeah. So it was nice to have a little bit of summer.
Yeah, because unfortunately, your summer was very short.
Yes, it's too short. It is back to the new academic year at NDU.
Yeah, so you had your first day back on Thursday.
Yeah, I mean, not that I went anywhere. We were still in the office this summer, but basically back in the swing of things, preparing to start teaching classes on August 11th and doing orientation with students and starting the new year.
Yeah, any big changes coming up for this year?
No, I don't think so. I think there's still a lot of turmoil over some of the students being told that they shouldn't start because there'll probably be rifts. So you still have problems with the agencies for students and some faculty. A lot of uncertainty there, but some changes to make the program more in line with the Secretary of Defense and Trump's statements on national security.
Okay. Can you talk much about that, or is you going to get your hand slapped?
Probably shouldn't say too much.
Like, I'm going to get my hand slapped.
Well, always just that anyway. But, just want to make sure in order to stay in business, we have to prove the value we are making to the U.S.'s national defense, and particularly the warrior ethos, the warrior ethos of the makeup of military.
Okay, so it's been framed that way. Like you need to justify your existence, or?
It's not expressly framed that way. It is implicitly framed that way.
Okay. Is there like a deadline to this proving your existence?
No,
like
it's
this
just
year's make or break?
No.
Okay.
It is just always continually making the case to the Secretary of Defense of our value added.
Now, has the Secretary of Defense visited the campus in any form at this point? Or No. Okay.
I'd be surprised if that happened.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, good luck with that.
Thanks. It's way, way too short. But, getting ready to teach students are great. So,
yeah, that part's always good.
On to recent international stories. One of the biggest ones is the August 1st trade deadline, where the Liberation Day tariffs go back into effect if we haven't had trade deals with every other country. So remember, we were going to have 90 trade deals within 90 days.
90 trade deals in 90 days. I guess it's from April.
Yeah.
So from the original Liberation Day to now. Well, what do you think? I mean, is there something to be scared of? Because markets have reached all-time highs. They're blowing this stuff off completely, that he's not going to go through with any sort of major like retaliatory tariffs on August 1st. But is the market going to be surprised next week?
Good question. Who knows? I mean, I think Trump is kind of unpredictable in this way. Really, I was reading that the markets are most concerned about China. And as long as there seems to be progress on a China deal, then they are pretty content. But I think if there's massive tariffs that go into effect in other countries, you might see a dent. Not the big dip that we saw on April 2nd, but you might see a dent in the market's optimism.
A bit of a sell-off, yeah. Yeah, no, it's been on a tear. I mean, when it bottomed out, it's up like 15, 20% since mid-April.
Yeah. So the biggest trade deal that was recently announced was that with Japan. The U.S. reduced proposed tariffs on Japanese imports from 25% to 15%, including autos and auto parts. This was in exchange for Japan's commitment to open markets to U.S. agriculture and auto exports, and pledged approximately $550 billion in U.S. investments and purchases. I mean, one of the questions that this has given rise to is this ultimately give Japan an advantage in selling cars compared to American ones who have to deal with a 50% tariff on steel and aluminum.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's definitely how the market has reacted, because Toyota, upon the announcement of this, its stock jumped up nearly 10%, which for a big conglomerate like Toyota, you don't have a price movement like that normally. So the market was interpreting this as a competitive advantage for Japanese automakers and thus benefiting their future revenues, particularly sales within the U.S., that they're going to be able to compete better than compared to their U.S.-based automakers.
One interesting side note to this, too, is the pressure this puts on Korea to get a trade deal, since they export many of the same items that Japan does to the United States. So particularly automobiles, and auto parts. And this would be a serious disadvantage to them if they can't get a similar deal to Japan.
Yep.
But they may actually have a harder time opening their agricultural markets because the need to protect that industry to keep it alive and the importance of the industry to the economy.
Yeah, for sure. So it seems like they'll have to find some other way to get in Trump's good graces to get kind of a similar tariff treatment.
Yeah. So I know that they were trying to get talks. I mean, this is also the problem with 90 deals in 90 days. There's just not enough people. There's not enough time to do that. So I know that they were hoping for talks this week with Bassett, but his schedule, he had to rearrange. That meeting got postponed because of his schedule.
Yeah. So do you get a feel for everything with this administration is shambolic, but how big is the team actually negotiating these deals, and does Bassett have to be deeply involved at every stage of it, or is there a ton of on the ground teams that, it seems impossible to negotiate, because we're not even talking full blown deals. These are just frameworks of a deal where the details are worked out. That's a formal deal.
Yeah.
With all the details worked out already. Because that's honestly the first one.
Well,
because even the UK one was just the framework of a deal.
So they're working on finalizing a deal with that this weekend.
Okay. Then the EU in general is hoped to have a breakthrough this weekend as well.
Yeah, I'm going to go into that in just a minute. But no, the thing about needing Bassett is that Trump wants to put his stamp on all these deals. He won't approve of anything just because of a working group on the ground negotiated a deal.
Right.
So the EU had one that they negotiated and they felt strongly about, but then Trump at the last minute said that's not good enough.
Yeah. I haven't been following this super closely, but answer me this. Nobody's better off from any of this, right? Ultimately, even with these negotiated deals, there's going to be a minimum of a 10% tariffs, a 10% tax on goods coming into the country. But this is just to limit damage of what was put in place or threatened to be put in place.
That's why the market reaction is so interesting, that it keeps going up, even though there's definitely economic harm that will be caused by these higher tariffs. But maybe Trump was smart into setting like tariffs so high that these increased tariffs in these deals are still much lower than what was threatened.
Yeah, that's part of his negotiate, to have anchor yourself to such an outrageous point that something that would have been equally outrageous, 2 years ago is now seems like a relief. But it seems like, even then, is the market just interpreting, well, maybe we'll have this for a couple of years and then with somebody else in the White House. Is it as easy as that you could go back to I can't imagine that you could ever go back to the world that existed before where the average tariff rate was like 3%. Was that a snap of the finger, or is that a whole, as hard as it was to get there in the first place?
I mean, technically, Trump has shown us you could do it with a snap of the finger. I mean, it's not impossible.
Yeah.
But the reality of it is very unlikely, and you would likely have to see renegotiating trade deals. But to some extent, just like he put the 10% tariff with the snap of his fingers on all goods and kind of decided that April 2nd, which he's threatened to put into effect for anyone who doesn't have a deal yet, those are all snap of the finger decisions.
Yeah.
Other important trade deals, but not nearly big of economies, were with Indonesia, where there'll be 19% tariffs down from 32%, and Vietnam, which is a 20% tariff on most goods, while the U.S. will have tariff-free access to Vietnam. But it's interesting because there'll be a 40% tariff will be applied to goods transshipped through Vietnam. So this is especially targeting China, which in order to get around the tariffs on China, then ships into Vietnam, and Vietnam passes on as their own. So I don't know how much this will be able to be enforced, to what extent, but I thought it was notable in their agreement. So deals in progress. One of the new developments on China is that there are talks to extend the deadline beyond August 12th. And so one of the questions this raises, or was raised to me this week, is why does China get an extension, but the other countries have been told that they have to adhere to an August 1st deadline? And the answers are kind of obvious about this, I think. You have the magnitude of the trade. So China is our second largest trading partner. And you have the magnitude of the tariffs, which instead of like having 35% threatened tariffs, you have 145% on the U.S. side and 125% on the Chinese side. And it's these tariffs that the market seems particularly honed in on and would likely to react to any negative sign of not getting a deal with China. So what they've agreed to so far is Beijing has agreed to end its export ban on rare earth minerals and magnets to the U.S., while Washington has agreed to restart shipments to China of semiconductor design software and production materials, as well as commercial aircraft engines and other goods. So basically what we had, what Biden had put export bans on in the name of national security.
Yeah, so what are your thoughts on that? Because that was probably one of the bigger items that came out and led to a jump in NVIDIA's stock price, was that NVIDIA would be allowed to export not its like high-end chips that are used kind of in the AI data centers here, but some of its lower-end chips. And that was seen as a really positive sign by the market and for NVIDIA itself, which has always spoken very favorably of Beijing. But what are the thoughts around kind of national security and kind of what Biden was trying to put in place with the CHIPS Act?
I mean, I have two minds about it. I mean, I think there are national security risks. On the other hand, well, two other things. If you have China dependent on U.S. technology, that could ultimately be a bargaining chip. At the same time, though, they might make these advances in weaponry or other uses of these AI chips that could threaten the U.S.'s own advancements in those areas. And, if it's the lower end chips, then you're really just competing with what China can already produce, just maybe not at the same mass level.
So do you think this is a strategic move by the administration since, following the CHIPS Acts, China's national semiconductor champion SMIC has made a lot of gains in terms of its capability. So to your point, if you allow like a little bit of NVIDIA chips in at this lower end level, you have them dependent then on US manufacturer.
I mean, to some extent, I think the genie is already out of the bottle because the US using this and banning these exports makes them see that vulnerability. Just like we see it on rare earth minerals because they banned that. And so I think they will continue to make the sort of progress that they have been making up to now.
Right.
So I think just the fact that you place that in like already changes the structure of the Chinese market and the relationship to the US. Mostly what I think this reflects that companies like NVIDIA have Trump's ear and have a very big influence.
Right. Yeah. Yep. That makes sense.
So things that they're still working out is a lot around U.S.'s complaints about Chinese state-led and subsidized export-driven economic models that has created excess manufacturing capability. But I think, how do you really resolve that? Because I don't think it's realistic that China could actually reduce its dependence on export-based economic strategy, particularly because they just have such low consumer spending.
Yeah, I know it's something they've struggled with mightily, but yeah, it all hinges on the collapse of the real estate market and the fact that Chinese domestic wealth was so tied up in real estate. Upwards of 70-80% of the individual's net worth was tied up in that. And it's basically been in a deflationary spiral for the last 3 or 4 years. So yeah, consumers combined with a job market, particularly for young people, is pretty ugly in China. So
and also you have the lack of a social safety net. So as people are preparing to age, means that they have to save a lot because they can't depend on any sort of help in terms of medical care or any other issues that come with aging.
Yeah, which I get part of it's culture, but part of it's like when people say China's like a communist country, I think this is probably the number one evidence that not in reality, because when you look at the US and kind of all its holes, its social safety net, and see that it's much more robust than what China, supposedly communist country, has, then just not quite adding up there.
Yeah, exactly. So not only did, as you said, so much wealth being destroyed in the real estate crisis, but they have many reasons why saving is more important. And even with some Chinese attempting some stimulus plans, there hasn't been a shift. So I don't know how these can be addressed because there simply isn't the domestic demand to fuel China's economy. And there's no easy solutions in how to generate the demand. Certainly China wants to do that, has tried to do that, but there are no real mechanisms that anyone can see to ultimately dramatically change that landscape.
Yeah, no, I mean, they've certainly tried, but yeah, you have to restore kind of that sense of security, which is difficult given the demographic trends. Mm-hmm. I mean, to your point, and that's headwinds that is just going to get worse and worse over the next 25, 50 years.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I'm just really curious. I think there'll be some sort of token agreement that looks like they're making progress on that, but I don't see how China agrees to buy more U.S. goods and certain things. Only this time they actually do it instead of the last trade deal that they signed with Trump, in which they never carried out those commitments. Both countries have to save face, but I think Trump just wants something that he can point to and maybe make some small progress on, but I don't think you're going to fundamentally change China in the relationship between China and the United States in terms of trade.
Yeah.
But I mean, we have these efforts since the first Trump administration. I mean, trade with China has gone down slightly. It used to be our number one trading partner, and now that's been replaced by Mexico. However, you also have Chinese companies in Mexico, too. Just all the ways that China has been successful in diverting its trade through third countries.
Right, yeah.
So as you alluded to, EU is another big trade deal that seems to be near. But as I said before, it really depends on if Trump will give the thumbs up to it. On his way to his golf course in Scotland this weekend, he told the media that he felt like the chances were 50-50, which doesn't sound great. But on the other hand, he said he would have given the chance of a deal with Japan at 25%. So maybe this is significant. So he's meeting with the president of the European Union Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, in Scotland on Sunday. What he would prefer to do is make deals on a country-by-country basis, but EU countries are not allowed to negotiate their own separate trade deals. So everyone is pretty optimistic, except this nervousness about what Trump's mood will be. So the proposed deal would apply a 15% tariff on goods from its member states, which is higher than the current 10% rate, but much lower than the 30% rate threatened in a July 12 letter. One thing that's a sticking point in the EU deal is the 50% tariff on steel and aluminum, which in other specific sector tariffs, the White House has threatened, such as pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and aerospace. This is interesting because in the Japan deal, they were not able to get any sort of remediation of this tariffs down from 50%. But this is an important part of deals with many countries, including South Korea, which we mentioned before, and the EU. He doesn't seem very willing to budge on this, saying that if he did negotiate a lower deal with one country, he would have to give it to all of them. So that remains to be seen on how this is going to affect the trade deals.
Again, I go back because it's not just the U.S. stock market. U.S. stock market has finally recovered its losses, but the real story this year has been international markets, which have generally been undervalued for a long time relative to the U.S. markets. Those are up a lot. And I get some of it's the weakening of the dollar. Is it just global markets, period, are blowing off whatever economic impact that this whole taco trade that Trump's ultimately going to chicken out or the tariffs are going to be minimum? Is all this being overblown? Because the international market, the UK market is having a record year, probably the best it's had in a decade.
I think you haven't seen really big impacts of even these 10% tariffs economically either way. And I think maybe the market's optimistic. So I think there are some reasons people are wondering, maybe Trump is right. Maybe they won't affect the economy. We certainly didn't see this reflected in inflation numbers in any significant way. But a lot of economists point to the large stockpiling that happened in the first quarter by companies and consumers, which surged in the first quarter. For now, it looks like most companies are eating the cost of higher tariffs. So you only have slight price raises in both imported and the domestically produced competitors of about 1 or 2% instead of the 10% increase in tariffs. But, I would say that probably is not indefinite. Companies that were still in the process of these political deals, and companies don't want to run afoul of Trump. Because not only are we negotiating trade deals with other countries, there's certainly, as we've seen with NVIDIA, there are company level negotiations going on as well to influence the outcome of these trade deals.
Yeah, it seems like such a lagging indicator. The other place you would see it, because these companies obviously can't eat it forever. And when they do eat it, what that means is their profits will be lower, and that'll be eventually reported and kind of reflected in market sentiment. I think the other thing coming out next week is a lot of how the U.S. economy overall performed in the second quarter. Some speculation that you could even see shrinkage, which officially would qualify as a technical recession, as I lost the bet on once. I think it would be on the order of that if it did happen.
It has to be 2 in a row, though.
Yeah, it was negative the first quarter.
Oh, it was?
Yeah.
One point, I think this was The Economist, I can't say 100%, pointed out that tariffs could push down prices via another mechanism by taking a toll on the economy, right? So Liberation Day crushed consumer confidence, which may have softened demand. So the sort of mechanisms that you are talking about, if you do have any recessionary pressure, then that actually will keep prices lower rather than seeing the increase due to tariffs. But overall, harm the economy either way.
Yeah, and then obviously the other thing benefiting the inflation impact, probably is one, lack of demand, but then two, energy prices being significantly lower, which is, as we talked about before, this semi-collusion between Trump and OPEC, the Saudis in particular.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's important to certain people in the economy, though. I mean, it might sound a lot like much is being made. And this is also probably like where the market is not seeing any significant changes. So they're still reacting to that. But I think if you see really dismal economic numbers, which we haven't seen the full impact on tariffs because of all these negotiating deals, if you have something substantially beyond this 10%, because of all of these April 2nd tariffs going into effect on the 1st, then you might see moves. But it's very interesting to me how much the markets are also just really keyed on China. Like if something fell apart with the China deal, then you would likely see more market response. And Trump is having fun threatening both countries and companies. Regarding Apple, he's threatened a 25% tariff on any iPhone not made in the United States, which means the price of iPhones.
It's every iPhone.
Already, exactly. I mean, and Trump doesn't understand why you can't just build iPhones in the United States, which if you did try to do that, then you would have at least a 25% price increase just in.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah.
If not doubling the price of it. Yeah, it's $2,000, $3,000 iPhones. And
so, I mean, we just don't have the cheap labor. We don't have it's just a massive undertaking. So, I mean, they have tried to move out of China by going to India, but Trump is not happy with that either. One thing that was kind of interesting, he threatened to impose a 50% tariff on all imports from Brazil, which many have interpreted that this is a response to the so-called witch hunt against Brazil's former president, Jair Bolsonaro, who is a political ally of Trump. He's facing trial for attempting a coup. He's also taken aim at so-called BRIC nations, which include Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and threatened on social media to impose an additional tariff on any country aligning themselves with the anti-American policies of BRICS. I mean, to the extent that this might all be bluster or what is real is just impossible to tell, which, again, it just seems like the market is just assuming it's all bluster. So I think, like I said, we also talked about just why we haven't seen the dramatic impact on the economy. But I think this sort of sums up where we are at the state heading into August 1st. And then that will be very telling. We may not have the podcast out before that. So by the time it's out, we may have more signs on whether Trump has been bluffing or not.
Yeah, we'll see if the taco trade holds. It's certainly bet that way, but maybe it could be surprised again.
Who knows?
Who knows? But I think the one thing is the man is very responsive to the market. So if he does overplay his hands and the markets drop 5-10%, he will reverse course.
Yeah, he'll find
something. I think there's zero doubt about that. And that's why there's the taco trade. And
but you should probably say what that stands for, taco.
Oh, yeah. Trump always chickens out. Yeah, I thought that was common knowledge by now.
Okay, it's maybe not everybody.
That's true.
Listens to the same sources. So moving on, one thing that kind of came out of the blue for me, not something that I was highly aware of, but with this conflict between Thailand and Cambodia, with both sides exchanging fire and becoming quite deadly.
Yeah, so the two countries exchanged fire on July 24th in a long-running border dispute that is focused specifically around a Hindu Buddhist temple that dates back to the Khmer Empire, which kind of reigned over Southeast Asia and comprised both of these countries from the 9th century to the 15th century. So quite a time ago, but this conflict has been something that has kind of been bubbling for a number of years and really dates back to a dispute around the colonial period. So during the 1800s, France actually occupied and colonized the country that would become Cambodia. And bordering it was Siam, so modern-day Thailand, which was loosely backed by the United Kingdom, but not a formal colony at the time. So you had a dispute in this border area, resulted in a French map in 1907 that had this particular kind of holy site partitioned out. So there was disagreement on this for a number of years until 1963, when the temple was handed over to Cambodia following a International Court of Justice ruling. But things flared up in 2008 when Cambodia attempted to register the site as a UNESCO World Heritage location. And this was because, I guess, the application included some of the land around it, which it actually belongs to Thailand. So this resulted in low-grade fighting for about 3 years that ended in 2011. And it's only recently that it has bubbled up to what we've seen and continues even today, where we've seen a pretty significant military exchange between the two countries. Just as reference, I mean, Thailand is a U.S. treaty ally and has been strongly supportive of U.S. action. They're actually important ally during the Vietnam War in terms of air bases and different provisions along those lines. So Thailand actually has a very significant modern military, probably one of the more powerful militaries within Southeast Asia. So actually within this exchange that occurred between the two countries, Thailand used F-16s to strike Cambodian targets. They have about 360,000 active military, which is about 3 times the size of Cambodia, which is seen as a Chinese-backed state within the region.
Mm-hmm. Most of these border conflicts you see crop up a lot have to do with sort of arbitrary maps during colonialization. It's always kind of interesting to me why they erupt when they do. It certainly was sort of a surprise to hear this sort of news. I think what's interesting is sort of the domestic politics. It's always, whenever we look at these conflicts in detail, domestic politics plays an important role in it, and certainly has been pretty dramatic in terms of this crisis, particularly in Thailand.
Yeah, so it is kind of interesting. It's almost like a family drama, like Succession or something that you would see on HBO Prestige TV. But you have these two families. So Thailand's prime minister, who's recently been suspended, and forgive on the pronunciation, but Paetongtarn Shinawatra was suspended in early July following a leaked call that she gave on June 15th with the Cambodian leader Hun Sen. Now, Sen and the family, Shinawatra, had actually had very close ties for a number of decades, and that's because Paetongtarn's father was actually prime minister for an extended period of time. So the Shinawatra family is really kind of a dynasty family that has had close ties with Cambodia. And they've actually made a number of deals that the opposition party within Thailand have used kind of as proof that maybe this family doesn't have the best interest of Thailand at heart. So it was the leak of this call that really was
which I thought was kind of interesting, like why he would leak it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's been a falling out. I mean, it came as a shock to the Shinawatra family that this call was leaked out, because she was it was obvious that Sen was treated as a respected elder. So, I mean, she was referring to him as uncle and was also criticizing the Thai military, which makes sense because the Thai military has actually conducted, I was surprised by this, has conducted 20 coups since 1932. And they have a very antagonistic relationship with the Shinawatra family, which most recently the military conducted a coup when I think his other daughter was prime minister, because this is really a family affair where this country kind of exchanges Sinawatra family members as prime minister over the decades. But the military had forcibly removed his other daughter from office at an earlier point. So there's quite a bit of antagonism between the military. So she was caught on this phone call actually criticizing her own military, which of course went very poorly with the public in general, where the military is fairly popular and tied very strongly to the royal family within Thailand. The other thing is the Sinawatra family is the father is currently under criminal trial for criticizing the royal family, which is against the law within Thailand as well. So there's quite a bit of intrigue going on. But the real question is, why did the Cambodian leader Hun Sen release this phone call transcript, which he knew would lead to kind of this deterioration within the affairs? And I think the biggest thing is, again, domestically, his son, Hun Sen's son, is now prime minister in Cambodia and is in kind of a relatively weak position where I think Cambodia's economy has certainly struggled. Both of these economies are struggling, particularly with the topic that we just discussed around U.S. tariffs, which are beginning to impact the future economic prospects of these countries, particularly when you add in if they're going to target kind of any Chinese related, that particularly hurts Cambodia. So it's seen as a way of, okay, this Sinawatra family is losing some political pull within Thailand, so it's worth more domestically for Hun Sen to punch back against this ancient enemy and gain, again, appear like the strong man for Cambodians and punching back. So yeah, there's a lot of drama here. I know Malaysia, as the current head of ASEAN, has been trying to negotiate a peaceful solution. I think both China and the U.S. have also pointed to hoping to have a negotiated solution. But we're now entering the third day of the conflict where there have been exchanges. Thailand actually came out and said it had killed 100 Cambodian soldiers in its strike. That wasn't confirmed by the New York Times, but if true, would represent a pretty big blow to the Cambodian military.
Yeah, it would. It's hard to say how true this is without other substantiation of it.
Right.
Cambodia said it's killed 12 Thailand soldiers. Given the size disparity, though, it wouldn't be totally surprising if they had killed 100 Cambodian soldiers.
Yeah, certainly if you're using F-16s, I don't know what the military targets were, but yeah, you could imagine that it could be a pretty devastating strike.
Yeah, so it's important to get a deal sooner rather than later because we definitely can see an escalation. I think hundreds of thousands of Thai have been evacuated from the border region.
Yeah, because it's quite a long border and you have 8 different districts within Thailand that are on that border. So yeah, you've seen a pretty big population evacuated at this stage. It's something that I can't see escalating kind of beyond kind of a very contained environment. And I think Thailand has certainly signaled, as well as Cambodia, they have kind of pushed away kind of an ASEAN negotiated solution, are looking for more bilateral, maybe a patching up of, since this is kind of a family squabble in a way between two old family friends. But I think it may be harder if what Thailand actually did was true and killed 100 Cambodian. Hun Sen will certainly be under pressure to have some sort of equality in that exchange so that they can both save face.
Yeah. So there's definitely that aspect. I mean, I think it's complicated by the fact that the prime minister is currently suspended.
Yeah, it's weird. She is suspended, but her party is still in power. So the deputy won, and she's actually still part of the government. She was just appointed, I think, under like the tourism ministry. So she has a temporary position still within the government. And I think the judge is expected to rule that, because this is really about an ethics violation based on what was recorded in the phone call. So it's a little bit of a, I don't know. Again, it kind of relies with Thailand's constitutional court and how they rule, but it is seen to be resolved.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I mean, the impact beyond the two countries is probably not that significant. Unlike sort of when we talked about Pakistan, India, which are nuclear powers, and that's why it's so strategically important. But anything that sort of is destabilizing.
Yeah, and I think it is. And because, again, Thailand's a U.S. treaty ally, and then Cambodia is Chinese backed. So you always have kind of that element of two proxies between the two major powers within the region.
Yeah. So hopefully we'll see a resolution soon.
Yeah, yeah.
The other thing we wanted to discuss, we haven't talked about Ukraine in a little bit and sort of what is going on with that. And in particular, to the extent that U.S. policy under Trump has been evolving. He was not able to end the conflict on day one, unfortunately. And his frustrations with Putin has certainly caused his stance on many issues to have changed to some degree, particularly in terms of providing weapons to Ukraine.
Yeah, so, it's been a little bit of obviously a roller coaster ride in the entire relationship, but certainly seems to be in a better place than it was with the White House meeting between Zelensky and Trump, which is all-time low point, and just the general feeling that the U.S. would immediately abandon Ukraine and throw them under the bus. And that's certainly the strategic bet that Putin made. And, as I think we'll discuss, continues to make because, frankly, Russia has not abandoned its maximalist goals for Ukraine. So it still believes that Trump and the U.S. and the West ultimately will abandon the country to its fate. So in terms of the battlefront itself, Ukraine has been consistently losing territory on the Eastern Front, but the crisis that a lot of analysts expected has not materialized. And that's really been a function of, some of the innovation that Ukraine has been able to pull off despite the lack of resources from kind of the start and stop provisions that the U.S. has been providing. And a lot of that is Ukraine put a huge investment in its drone program. So it's been able to deploy a significant additional number of drone battalions kind of on the front. And it's been interesting seeing that become a bigger and bigger part of the war and has been a big factor. And despite the material advantage that Russia has and the manpower, that they've been unable to make like huge advances in the summer offensive.
Yeah, definitely. And certainly, as we talked in our last episode, how drones are changing warfare, and nowhere is that more apparent than in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. So I think continuously how Ukraine innovation has made up for some of its weaknesses is a very interesting aspect of the war.
Yeah, and it is drones on both sides. I mean, the Russians have probably a numerical advantage in drones, but it's been this also kind of on the technical level, just the fact that they've gone away from kind of the autonomous, without a wire, relying on signal, and are now like most of the drones being used are actually physically tied to a fiber optic lines that stretch up to 25 kilometers. So now the battlefield is kind of littered with these long stretches of fiber optic cables, which actually extends the range of the drones and their ability to function. Because before it was maybe limited to like 5 kilometers from the pilot. And now it can be up to 25 kilometers with these fiber optic lines.
The main reason for this was the success that Russia had in jamming the signals.
Right.
So Russia is pretty advanced in electronic warfare, and both countries were able to do that to each other, and thus that's why they had to switch to fiber optics.
Yeah, so now that seems to be the norm on both sides, or these kind of fiber optic linked drones. And I was shocked by this statistic, but this is listening to the War on the Rocks podcast with Michael Kaufman. But there are estimates that up to 50 to 70% of the casualties currently occurring are linked to drones now. That's how integral it has become to the nature of the war going on. So it really is pretty shocking. So the tactics in terms of how they're adjusting, like Russia has largely abandoned the use of armored, big, slow-moving armored vehicles.
Which are so vulnerable to
You're right.
drones.
Yeah, so they're switching to much smaller size forces, actually using ATVs or motorcycles to try to advance the front lines, just because that makes it harder. But there's such a thick network of drones that it's, even with that, if they can hold the territory and then get reinforcements, it's difficult. But those are the sort of tactical changes that they're making along those lines. And then just in general, Russia's trying to target more behind the lines to get after those Ukrainian drone pilots and kind of where they're positioned. So all of this has led to more rapid Russian advancements, but it's just so much slower, to the point where the economists actually estimated at this current pace, which is much accelerated from last year's Russia offensive, that it would take them till 2029 in order to take back all the territory of the 4 oblasts that the Russians have kind of formally claimed as their own. So it's certainly not what Putin expected. Putin expected this to be, kind of a collapse. So he'd be able to consolidate these gains very quickly. And you haven't seen that. So that's been a real testament to kind of Ukrainian innovation in these areas. So I think the other area which you mentioned is kind of the shifting U.S. policy. And that's something that, following the July 14th NATO meeting, kind of caught some people off guard, and in a positive way if you're a supporter of Ukraine. And that Trump came out pretty aggressively, saying that the U.S. was committed to continuing to support Ukraine. So at least providing weapons that have already been approved under the Biden administration, that those would continue to be released, but also giving Russia a 50-day ultimatum to end the fighting or actually face secondary tariffs on any country that buys Russian exports. Now, this threat, I think, is widely held within the market as being completely uncredible.
Yeah, it would seriously complicate negotiations between the U.S. and China, because it's China who buys most of Russian oil. Of course, India as well. So that would cause a lot of new trade tensions.
Yeah, not to mention working against his own domestic goal of having $50 per barrel oil. And what we mentioned before, the only thing keeping inflation in check is the lower energy prices. So you would reverse that and then some, if this actually went through. So I don't think anybody's seeing this as credible at all. But still, I guess the rhetoric, for whatever it's worth, the tone has shifted. I think the other big thing that you mentioned is the Biden administration did provide, with what Congress passed, and has probably through the end of the summer, provisions, still billions worth of equipment that can be provided to Ukraine. But after that, heading into the fall, with nothing else, Congress would have to approve additional provisions. And that's unlikely to happen. But what kind of emerged was this idea that Trump seems to like a lot, is that we would sell the weapons directly to EU, to NATO, and then NATO would transfer those weapons to Ukraine.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the question there is, what are the European resources? Can they buy the same amount of weapons as the U.S. was previously providing for Ukraine?
Yeah, I think that is the active question, is how deep can they dig into their pockets and debt finance. I mean, a lot of these countries have set much higher targets for defensive spending. And part of that commitment was we're going to spend 3%, and have a long-term target of 5% in some countries. But any that was spending on Ukraine, because that's seen as common defense of the EU, would count towards that percentage. Right. So that would certainly be part of this.
Yeah, it's a great deal for the U.S. if Trump can get this through, right? Because then
which is important. If Trump thinks it's a great deal, then it's important, for the long-term defense of Ukraine, which is the most important thing.
We keep producing more weapons, helps our industrial base.
Yeah.
and Europe is the one fueling it.
As long as the EU is willing to come up with that, which has always been a questionable thing.
Yeah. I mean, they have provided a lot of economic aid to Ukraine and have financed a lot of the war.
Yeah. And just saying that, what I did read is the EU is thinking of using, again, remember the seized funds?
Oh.
So using part of those provisions to pay for the weapons to funnel it into Ukraine.
Oh,
that was originally supposed to be a slush fund to help Ukraine rebuild.
Yeah.
So you are tapping into the rebuilding fund, which, if there's not a country, there's nothing to rebuild. So It kind of makes sense.
Yeah. So it certainly will be interesting to see how this develops. But I think that, the tone from Trump has shifted a lot in expressing negative feelings toward Putin, who he previously sort of talked about, I'm the one who can deal with Putin, like we're on the same wavelength. I think this happens too frequently to U.S. presidents, to be like, yeah, we know how to deal with each other. And then to find like Putin just does not respond to the type of incentives that U.S. presidents think that they can throw out there.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the interesting thing. It was covered in that War on the Rocks podcast with Michael Kaufman and Ryan Evans. And they talked about, just kind of the surprise that the deal that the U.S., when Trump first came into office, put on the table for Russia, that in many ways could certainly be framed as a full political victory for Russia. But Putin did not take that deal. So it really seems like he is so wed to these maximalist goals that you absolutely have to have the guarantee that Ukraine is a failed state, isn't allowed a military. The other part that I had forgotten is part of the Russian demands, but that Russian has to be the official language of Ukraine too.
Oh,
that's in there. So it's a full cultural victory too. Mm-hmm. It's, yes, Ukraine still exists, but it is fully a vassal state of Russia. That he still has those provisions, even though you could have effectively had all the oblast. Mm-hmm. You claimed all this territory. You've already ethnically cleansed those territories within Ukraine to such an extent. And you would have had the goodwill of the U.S. and potentially, economic sanctions relief and all of this stuff that was on the table. But Putin rejected it. So we've gone back this far. Is Putin fully rational in that sense then? Or is it just is he so oriented towards the restoration historically of not so much the Soviet Empire, but the Russian Empire, and that Ukraine is so central kind of in his mind that he's not a rational actor in this case?
I think he's rational, but I don't know how strategic he is. I mean, it's hard to say. He's betting on the fact that the U.S. and Europe will not continue to support Ukraine.
Right.
Right? That they won't be there.
Which wasn't a bad bet, but he basically had it in his hand, right? At the beginning, what the U.S. was offering. Why not take it then? Was that the strategic slip up? You want to go for it all.
Right. And that's the thing where he may just not be thinking as strategically. I mean, we said from the beginning, yeah, sure, Russia can take these 4 oblasts, but the fact that they tried to invade all of Ukraine was always the part where we thought was a mistake on Putin's part. So, I mean, he's clearly driven by his vision, but it's not an irrational bet. It is one, though, that seems strategically questionable.
Yeah. And that being said, of course, you can't trust Trump over his word at all, and he could easily flip back 180 degrees in a second. He really is who speaks to him last. I think the good thing what the EU and NATO leaders have done well is there's a lot of them. And there are a lot of contact points compared to the pretty infrequent contact points with Putin. So more often than not, you can be somebody advocating for Ukraine could be the last person speaking to him in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and I think people are more aware in this term how to deal with Trump, understand the way he thinks.
Extreme flattery.
What you need to do.
Call him Big Daddy if you're, or whatever Mark Rutte, the current head of NATO, said that Daddy sometimes needs to come in. And I don't know, it's pretty gross, but
That's terrible.
Everybody has their own
Trump
little...
using foul language or something.
Oh, yeah. That's right. Yeah. Because he dropped the F-bomb, and Margaret was saying, oh, yeah, Daddy has to use tough language sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I think you've seen this widespread, like instead of just outright imposing Trump, which companies did the first time, which European governments did the first time, instead of doing that where they can't get what they want, then they look like they're capitulating, but to some extent they're trying to manipulate Trump.
Flatter. Yeah.
Flattery.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's an interesting trend. Europe seems to be managing it pretty well in terms of Ukraine.
Yeah. I mean, I think I think Russia's also overstepped, not that there was ever public sympathy, but because of the number of strikes on Ukrainian civilians, on just civilian targets, on areas that haven't been struck for a number of years, particularly in the western part of the country, like Kiev and towards the Polish border. That's something that has antagonized Trump as well. I mean, he's definitely like, what's Putin doing? It clearly, because he's given these ultimatums before and kind of these push towards a negotiated solution. But the fact that Putin continues to push these things forward has not been winning him any points as well. I think interestingly, too, is the Russian economy, which, we've certainly talked about before, and just the fact that, they have successfully transitioned fully to a war economy, and so much of it focused on that, and has maintained, not spectacular growth rates, but some growth rates. But it does seem to be straining, I think, particularly with the loss of revenue with oil prices coming down.
That makes sense.
So in order to keep inflation, again, the economy is very overinflated because so much of it is going into the defense sector. So interest rates are currently at 20% just to keep inflation under control. And a total of a little over 6% of GDP is spent on the military. And that's actually been acknowledged by Putin and Russia as not being sustainable. They actually had to announce that they're planning to cut defense spending next year and in the remaining years, maybe as a signal to, I don't know how much they depend on international, I guess it would be Chinese financing for supporting some of their debt. So it does seem like the Russian economy is straining under this. And then, they've already reached 1 million casualties. They have been able to keep about 30,000 per month in recruiting, but all of that is because they're offering massive incentives, which again are adding to
that is an advantage for Russia no matter what, because Ukraine is really struggling with its own recruiting goals and
absolutely,
being able to replace the people who are being lost on the battlefield.
Yeah.
And how long Ukraine's a small country. How long can it keep it up?
Yeah. And that's where the innovation comes in. That's where investing in these drone battalions, from the description of the front. I mean, some of these areas are pretty sparsely defended, but the drones are actually a force multiplier that you can push away, a numerically superior force, at least for the time being, and the ways that they're working. Obviously, it's like countermeasures being developed all the time.
That's what's interesting, because you certainly can see how you have that advantage for maybe like 6 months or something, right?
Yep.
Technology can give you that, but then the other side catches up. Can you continually innovate your way? Or do you eventually hit a stalemate where both sides are using the technology?
No, it's extraordinary. I mean, you talked about it in your interview, but I mean, this is very much like you're seeing a laboratory of the future of warfare, being figured out. I mean, this is the Spanish Civil War before World War II.
Yeah, in many ways, the fact that they're changing also the more mobile units and stuff kind of shows how certain equipment that have been around where we fought, since World War I or World War II, tanks.
This is World War II,
yeah, since tanks and China case, your big aircraft carriers, those are not as useful now in the context of modern warfare. And may themselves be kind of obsolete. I mean, we just don't know. I think also what we're taking from this may be the Spanish Civil War But, the caveat is the U.S. is very focused on China, and a war with China would look very different than a land.
Naval,
A naval air battle is very different than a sort of land. But it is interesting to me, like what technology they're making kind of obsolete or much, much less effective that have been part of traditional ways of fighting war.
Yeah, that being said, I mean, I think there was, again, going back to the War on the Rocks podcast, there was sort of like, the sentiment and kind of course, the buzz is like, drones are taking over every aspect of kind of the future of warfare, but not to overplay that too much. It's still kind of supplemental to kind of some of the main forces. It's only maybe the unique situation that Ukraine and Russia are in with their own unique challenges that.
But I think it's important. The way it's changing what other equipment is effective, right? I'm not saying that it's just being fought drone on drone.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is they have to use different types of vehicles now. Tanks are not effective in this sort of environment that's created by drones.
Yeah. I'd say that the one caveat is that the Russians also maybe have not been effective or have never been very effective in the combined use of force. So it's maybe their use of armored vehicles and tanks aren't fitting in with like proper coordinated air power in drones and other things.
But I don't think it's been effective on the Ukraine side.
Well, that's the problem is they don't have that ability either. I mean, they didn't have the time for the training during the offensive a couple summers ago.
Most of what we gave them is broken down.
Yeah.
And
because, I mean, we talked about it probably at the time, but that was never, there was a lot of frustration, certainly from the US and from the NATO side on how Ukraine chose to do that. And also that maybe stuff was rushed a bit too. But it's always the thing that people point towards, with China to not having that actual war experience and the complexity of the logistics of combined modern warfare, of coordinating air forces and drones and ground troops and all of that, naval forces, is a complicated matter that isn't just, it's not easy to do. There's very few forces that can do that. But it's interesting. Ukraine's hanging in there. Problem is Russia seems no more willing to negotiate than it did in the beginning of the conflict. And I think that ultimately is the problem. So I think Ukraine is preparing for the long run, how it can get the provisions, particularly, what it needs is around air defense. So getting Patriot missile batteries. And hopefully this whole solution of selling weapons, U.S. weapons to NATO and the EU, and then having that transfer is something that can work out. Otherwise, there'll be a crisis beginning the latter half of this year.
So again, I mean, it's not completely irrational for Putin to be like, no, I'm going to wait this out. I'm going to see how this plays. I mean, I think if we ever got to a point where it was certain that, I think the problem is, how the U.S. can do this when they're struggling with Congress. If there was a point where it was certain that the U.S. and Europe would maintain enough support for Ukraine, then Putin might be like, okay, it's time to take this deal. But as long as there's uncertainty over that, Putin can maintain, whether, again, the odds are in his favor is different, but he can maintain this idea that maybe I can get these maximalist goals because eventually Ukraine is going to run out of weapons and support.
Right.
Hopefully that won't happen. So I think that brings us to the end of this episode of Kellogg's Global Politics. You can visit our website at kellogg'sglobalpolitics.com and follow us on X at Global Kellogg or me, where I mostly post, at AR Kellogg.
And you can also reach us by email. So Anita at kellogg'sglobalpolitics.com and myself, Ryan, at kellogg'sglobalpolitics.com. As always, we see the show notes for the articles we discussed in this episode.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.